Fiona, welcome to the Dark Night of the Soul Unwrapped.
Thank you.
It would be good to start at the beginning.
Yes.
What was happening around the time your Dark Night of the Soul began?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think there was a day that I remember it beginning. I remember it as a stretch of time. And in terms of the world events, it was COVID. I remember that. But in my life, I had gone through a breakup months before. And even though it might have impacted my decisions after in terms of location, I don't really think Dark Knight had anything to do with the breakup. But that breakup ended up meaning that because we had just moved in together and lived together maybe 2 months or so, 2, 3 months, and it was quite a sudden breakup on my end. I was pretty blindsided and I didn't want to look for a place again. I had just moved after, living on my own for 5 years. So I packed up my stuff, put them in a storage, took my dog and a luggage and bought a one-way ticket to Mexico. So that was sort of the start. And I think Mexico really helped me. And I was working with an incredible therapist at the time, really helped me work through the attachment rupture that happened through the breakup and all of that. And after that, something started shifting. And I remember one of the fundamental pieces that was different for me was my being, my soul wanted solitude. I, with everything in my being, um, needed to avoid crowds, big cities, I was, and at the time that I came across your book, I was in Montreal. My brother was living there, so I had gone there as well and subletted this lovely garden suite apartment. And I was working online with my own clients at the time. And all I was doing was walk in the parks, read books, see my brother once a week, and do sessions to understand what was happening to me. And it was really difficult. Internally, it was incredibly difficult. And I couldn't pinpoint, I can't, because I can't pinpoint anything external that was causing the internal, because external was normal, whatever normal is. But internal, it was like I was losing my mind.
Looking back now, what's your sense of what was happening internally?
Hmm. I think an incredibly deep shift was taking place. For the shift to happen, things needed to be unearthed first. So everything fell, and I just get goosebumps talking about it. Incredible sense of ungrounded. There's no ground. I don't know what's right, what's wrong, what's true, what's not. Anything my mind says, the opposite gets proven within seconds. So, an example that I always remember, I would be walking down the street and I would have a thought that says, just like a silly example, no one in the city wears hats. And I would see three guys back to back wearing a hat. This would happen in seemingly positive or negative ways. I would say, no one in the city smiles at me with my dog. Then someone smiles. And it was just my mind being the information gathering and creating resource was just losing its credibility. But it was incredibly difficult because I didn't know what else to replace it with. That had been my vessel my whole life. It was very scary.
There's a word you just used, which I love, which is unearthed. And that was also my sense too, that there was a deep downward movement. What's your sense of that motion of being unearthed and what it was that was being unearthed.
And I love how you said a deep downward movement. That really resonated. Um, what was being unearthed? I think what was being unearthed was a way of being. I can call it now, looking back, conditioned. I can. At the time, it was harder to pinpoint that. And a way of operating, a way of thinking about the world, seeing the world. And I remembered one more piece that was when I went to Montreal. I don't think I was necessarily looking for something, but I had this deep feeling that that's not it. This is not it either. This is not it either. And nothing is it. It was that. It's almost like, oof, I'm like choking up a little bit. It was almost like anything that I was promised, externally or internally, completely demolished. Now what? And it wasn't like, oh, I was unhappy in my, I was single at the time. It was like, I was unhappy in my marriage. Not that. Not I was unhappy at my work. I am still doing my soul's work. I know that. I had my beloved dog. I'm next to a family member in a city relatively pretty good. So what is it? It was a huge unknown, I think, also. Yeah.
I love what you said about the fact that it was a whole way of operating that was being unearthed. And I think often people who haven't been through this might understand the unearthing of, say, childhood trauma or, the unearthing of the past. I think it's quite hard to convey, and you just put it beautifully, that what's being unearthed is a whole way of being, a whole way of operating, all of the conditioning around that.
Yeah.
And that we're left with, my sense was that I'd lost the operating manual on how to be me.
Yes.
And I had
Yes.
no idea how to go about that on a very basic level.
Yeah. Because I think when I think about it today from, my rational mind, there are all these shoulds and needs and do it this way and you'll get rewarded, right? It can be somewhat of a religious belief or cultural or familial. And when all that goes down, who am I? Am I gonna be okay? Because am I even good? What the fuck is going on? And how am I going to decide on my next action?
Yes, I think that's what you just said is so crucial in this, isn't it? Because our actions have been decided by the shoulds very often, haven't we? We've referred back to the
Yeah,
shoulds unconsciously, of course, all the time and everything, and created our reasons or our narratives around our own decisions based on those shoulds.
definitely.
I think when we haven't known a sense of agency apart from the shoulds and conditioning, that leaves us in that place you just described of like, how do I be? How do I act?
Yeah. And when you say that, what comes up for me is, yeah, I think it was a journey of meeting myself, who myself is deep down. And I don't think today it's the process is complete. In no way it's complete. And there's less fear having gone through what I've gone through at the time and sort of dismantling all of those in the fear. And, when you said the downward movement, that really still stayed with me. And the image I get is almost like the mother's womb going down into the cave. And for me, after the time in Montreal, which was just the beginning, and it gotten deeper and more intense after. And my desire, which I had never felt that before, was to move to a relatively remote island. I first looked at a place that only 1,000 people lived, couldn't find a place there. I ended up in this island with, I think, 10,000 people, but it was COVID. I was new and I would go days on end without seeing anyone. It was hard that piece was really hard, and that's another story, that kind of isolation. But I know now, looking back, there was a divine knowing or pull towards that way of being that could give me the soil in which I could sort of dismantle and decompose. I don't think I could have done it while having a lot of people around me.
That divine pull to solitude is such an essential part of this, it seems to me. And I always, I'm always in wonder at the ways we find to do that, given the circumstances and limitations of our lives. I don't know how, but somehow I managed to find that in the city. Moving to a remote island was at that point my dream, really. I mean, there was a strong pull to go and live in a cottage by the sea,
Yeah.
being looked after by an older woman. I think that pull is precisely for the reason you just said, that we need a space in which to decompose and dismantle.
Yeah. And I love how you said, being looked after by an older woman. There's something so tender and caring about that, imagining that, an older woman with her wisdom and with her care and with her permission to just allow us to be what we are, and just this really gentle care.
What comes to me is that that's eventually what we become.
Yes, I was just gonna say that. Oh, yeah, because that journey, I think, ends up being giving that to ourselves, being that for ourselves, right? And I had yourself included, because with your book you were with me, and I had another lovely woman that I did a few sessions with in person on this island, Salt Spring Island. I went to her because she was supposedly a massage therapist. It was way beyond that. We were doing shamanic journeys, and there was a session, I will never forget it. I was on the massage table, fully clothed. She wrapped me in sheets and held me to her chest. It was that. It was going back to the beginning, into the womb, into the beginning times, and really being held in that deep. What just came up now, I've never thought of it this way, but it was a rebirthing. It was coming to this earth in a completely new shape and form, and being held through that in ways that maybe I wasn't.
As you describe that, I have a memory of going
Mm.
back, and of course we know how visceral these experiences are in the dark night, of seeing a moment when I was probably about 2.5, and
Mm.
when I was in the dark night, I had the experience of reconnecting with that moment and seeing myself withdrawing into a dark cave and really wanting somebody to come in after me, and then feeling the grief that they never
Yeah.
did. Something in me withdrew itself because it knew it couldn't be what it was in that environment. And I think those kind of deep seeings are impossible to get to by any other route.
Yeah. Yeah, this deep need to hide, right? I resonate with that as well. And imagine just seeing you in the cave. I resonate with that deep need to hide. And similarly, I think there was an intelligence to that I won't be understood. And this is something I did since I was a child. I always turn to books. Books are my beloved companions, and I was so fortunate, honestly, so fortunate to have found your book and this other incredible woman that I work with, Jeannie. She also went through a dark night, and I did one-on-one sessions with her online as well. Because I think what that did, they didn't save me from anything, because I couldn't have been saved anyways. I had to go through that. But they kept, to a degree, my mind sane that I'm not going crazy. I mean, I am going crazy, but it's it's an okay crazy, right? It's someone to say, yes, I get it. I know.
It's that validation of the reality of the process that feels so important.
Yeah.
You use the phrase losing my mind. And for me, there's something quite literal about that, isn't there, in the dark night that we've, like you, I depended on my mind as my source, my reference point. In a sense, considered that I had a good mind intellectually.
Yeah.
So that was the one aspect of myself that I felt good about. And
Mm.
one of the first things to fall apart in the dark night was the identity around being clever. And that was both frightening but also deeply relieving. What a relief that I don't have to be clever. And I think it was that, again, coming back to the shoulds, it was that in order to be me, I have to be clever. And so there was a proving of it, there was something going on that wasn't quite natural, or having to hold that cleverness in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah. Almost like that sort of charge, right? Like I have to be smart, clever, intellectual. And then as the mind gets disproven, it's like, oh, okay, so I can't, you're not really a reliable source here. And when I think about it, I mean, my process happened the way it happened. I don't think there's a right or wrong way or a way that it's supposed to happen. For me, this mind piece took a couple years, maybe even a few years, because I remember years after that, how many years would it have been? Maybe 2, 3 years. I was at a park talking. I think I was talking to my brother, maybe on the phone. And I remember feeling this stretch, feeling, oh, I gotta start making my heart, my body the compass, not my mind anymore. This is actually sort of metaphorically about killing me. I just can't go on like this anymore. And I do believe that it was culmination of all that whole process. So it wasn't an overnight thing at all. If anything, it was a very extended process. I think what increased over the months was awareness more and more and more. So then it almost feels like the experience itself is getting intensified because it's so much more acute and right in my face.
We might not know the answer to this, but I think it's worth asking the question. What's your sense of what happens to our minds as in this process of the center of gravity, if you like, shifting from our minds to our hearts and bodies?
When you ask that, it was so interesting. I felt almost like a tiny bit of sadness and grief come up. It's almost like, I don't know how else to say it, but I think the mind dies. And it brings up a little sorrow for me because for a very long time the mind is the king. And we rely on it, right? We give it that role and that place in our operating system. So even though we can talk about it now as something glorious that happened, I think there's also grief in that.
I get the word dethroning,
Yes.
that
Yes.
it's dethroned in some way, having taken itself to be the king.
Yes. And it's interesting you said that because I was actually seeing a king come down and admit that I'm not fit for the role anymore.
Beautiful, because that's what it is, really, isn't it? I mean, the mind, it struggles in that role, I
Yes.
think, so
Yes.
much. And the part of it that has to do the enforcing of the shoulds, I think that for me, whether we call that the inner critic or the superego part that's attached to the should structure, I think that is the thing that's most dethroned in this process?
Yeah. Yeah. I think also in that dethroning process with the shoulds, I remember really working with, maybe starting to work with, I should say, shame. Huge work around shame. And actually, I want to jump for a second because I think this is important. For my time in Montreal, when this whole process started, one of the defining elements of it was also anger. I got in touch with, or realized, noticed an immense amount of anger. And most of it started with authority, directed at authority. Anyone and anything that says no to me, that says you should do this, you should do that. And that can even be a post that I see on Instagram that has that kind of a language, to a road sign that says no entry. I would lose it.
How fascinating. What do you make of that anger now, the force and the energy of that?
Yeah. I think when we're putting it all together right now, to me it's becoming even more clear that this whole thing around should, because it's so internalized, right? And it is an internal experience, but it's also external. And it's almost easier to access the external and slowly pull the thread into the internal authority, the should inside. But it first starts with the outside. I mean, being told what to do, don't do this, don't do that. Oh, that's rude. This is that. Constantly being shaped. And the whole process feels like I'm breaking all my chains. Well, I have to break the external chains as well. For me, growing up in the culture that in Turkey and I grew up, and maybe this goes for most us women around the world, is be polite, be quiet, be this, be cute, be nice. And that's what the mind takes as instructions. Oh, I went to the anger room a couple times to, actually get it out. I remember one time I went to a park. The park was empty, thankfully. I just grabbed a piece of rock, a big rock, and I started just throwing it, and pick up again and throw, really getting in touch with that anger and with my no and with this. And it felt at the time like there was no end to it. It was just anger and anger and anger to the whole everything, to the whole system, internal and external.
That no feels to me like an essential part of the dark night, wherever in the
Mm,
process we meet that. And I think that for me was really wrapped up in the shame. I think there was definitely is some sort of relationship between the shame and the no. I think because of all the times I hadn't said no,
yeah.
the shame of having acquiesced, I mean, I didn't have the language around fawning at that point,
Yes.
but subsequently to see all of those words that I'd used, like, acquiesced, disarmed, appeased, pleased, how actually that was being in fawn, and the giving up of ourselves in some way in order for the shoulds and to meet that social conditioning that you described. Like in some way we sacrificed our, I was going to say deeper selves, but for some reason bigger selves comes in, threw ourselves under the bus in order to meet those shoulds. And as you said, shame was absolutely huge for me all the way through this. And I think that's largely what my conditioning, my self-construct was mediated by, was needing to keep myself as best I could out of shame. But inevitably, in order trying to not be shamed, would do things that meant I was further shamed. It felt like it was an impossible loop to get out of.
Yes. Yeah. And almost like the only way out is through. right, is actually facing the shame, is actually seeing, again, I'm not saying I've completed this process in any way. Shame is still something that I work with, but in a way, turning towards it so that it's less scary.
In my experience, shame is one of the hardest things to feel.
Yeah.
And I've come to the conclusion that that's partly because it's imposed, that it comes from outside. It isn't like grief or rage or things that are in natural
Mm.
internal
Mm.
reactions. And I think the fact of feeling shame can in itself feel shameful. And then, I'm brought back to what we were saying about hiding, that because of the intensity of the shame, we tend to hide. And for me, particularly at the beginning of the dark night, there was the feeling that the mask was falling off, that structure was falling apart. And what was underneath or behind it was so shameful that there would be dire consequences if anybody saw the reality of that.
Yeah, I resonate with that. And, when you said the mask coming out, yes, that's what I remember saying. I can't be around people because I can't mask it anymore. I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to behave as if whatever the as if is, you know. And there was an incredible amount of grief. I was crying every day, all day. So much crying because of all of this, right? It was so now I can't really hang out with people because I don't want to, but then I feel lonely. I feel the weird one out. I don't know what's going on. I'm ashamed of the whole thing that's happening in myself. What makes it a dark night of the soul, the significance of it, or the defining one of the defining factors maybe is it's so layered. It's not just one thing, it's incredibly layered. And it kind of comes from every angle.
I love that sense of it being so layered and things interwoven with each other. As you say, it's everything coming in. There's grief, and I totally relate to the crying. I mean, same here. I could be crying for days on end, pretty much. And particularly in the intensity of it, we have no idea what's coming in next. It isn't like it happens according to some sort of, I mean, I think there is a deep intelligence behind it. But at the time when we're in it, it feels random and it feels chaotic. And we don't yet have sufficient awareness or understanding of the movement of it to see, oh, this isn't madness. This is, even though it doesn't feel like it, it's actually a movement towards greater sanity, not less sanity.
Yeah, and I truly believe that, and that's why, you're doing the book and this podcast, I think is incredibly, incredibly valuable because if no one says that, we don't know it. Because going through it, it doesn't feel like we're going through a better sanity. It feels like we're going to the ditch, you know?
The ditch, yes. What's coming to me just now, and I think is something I've had a much greater sense of in more recent years than I did at the time, was that those structures, the shoulds, the conditioning, is in itself insane. And I
Mhm.
think we're seeing that certainly much more clearly recently than we were doing sort of 18, 19 years ago when I was in it. The structure, the wider structure, the wider paradigm in which we live, in which our cultures operate, is in itself insane. And so it's no wonder that our internal systems are insane. I think what you said about losing our minds does have there's a realness to that, isn't there? That
Mm.
we lose what we thought was what we always took to be logic and rationality and reason. And we can't think our way out of this. we can't find reasons, causes, rationales, other than, I think, through poetry, through music, through an understanding that this is a dark night of the soul.
Yes, very much so. Exactly. And we can't dictate when it's going to end. When is the ending? Or that I think what I discovered, again, looking back now, nothing external would really make it better in a sustainable way, because it wasn't there to be made better off to begin with. It was there to be felt. And in my journey, I do wonder sometimes, because living on that island with the isolation, loneliness took over for me. And maybe if I had different circumstances, um, there wouldn't a way that I deepen and deepen and deepen into the experience. I think I did to the extent of my ability. And what I realized, or what I experienced in the way that I'm naming it now, through that, I think I was pulled into, like we were saying, into the cave, into a very deep, maybe the deepest attachment wounding, that my core wounding, I was pulled down into that. And I had to eventually, not I had to, I chose to work with it, go through it. And for me, it was, very deep attachment wounding and existential. I had a huge existential wounding, and it was probably 2, 3 years I was in it all. And so maybe that's part of Dark Knight, or Dark Knight is the beginning. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I'm really clear that is part of it. How that gets played out, I think, can be different for all of us. My sense
See.
now is that usually it's the beginning. And I had a very similar experience, that it was a it was a falling into the deepest wounding. And it isn't that there aren't, I mean, as you said, it's so layered, and it isn't that there hasn't been an exploration over in, all of the subsequent years of the finer details of that layering. But it's really clear to me that the intensity of the Dark Night for those 4 years or so was being thrust into that with no choice but to go through it.
Okay, I see. Okay, this is actually helpful for me to put into a context. Thank you for that. Okay, yeah, so that's exactly what it was. Now that I have that understanding, that's exactly what it was. I am going through this. There's no running away, because nothing that I tried as a means to run away from it worked.
Exactly. I mean, I love that we're laughing about this now, and I totally get that we weren't laughing about it at the time. I felt like in the early days of the Dark Night, I ran around trying everything I could to stop it. And of course, that's really natural that we'd do that, because, as we said, it feels like we're going mad. It feels like we're not going to survive it. And yet, the Dark Night itself takes us past all of that. I think eventually we get to see,
Mhm.
oh, as you said, it is not about stopping this in any way. It's about being in it. And when I think when we start to touch into those moments when we're in touch with the deepest wounding, but there's also something else that comes in. It's not just the pain.
You know what's coming up for me when you were saying, the Dark Knight takes us. I think those were your words. Um, it's much stronger than my logical, rational mind, and going back to the losing the mind. And I think with that, it's also not my will anymore. It's not going to happen through my will. And I get goosebumps just saying that, because I think for me, at the end of it all, not just overnight again, but over time, that is the new understanding, new way of being, new operating system. that starts to really get solidify, because it's my mind. I love my mind. Thank you, my dear. Thank you. And you're so limited. And through you, I end up being limited. And there's something much bigger. And most of the time, I don't understand. And honestly, I stopped trying to understand. And I still am. I love concepts and talking about things and trying to sort of see, the workings of things. But now it comes, it gives me more comfort to say, I don't know. Not knowing was incredibly scary for me in my younger years. And I thought that this whole thing, this human experience, was punishment. This is a lost game, and we're just all thrown into this like puppets, and we're playing. And now I feel like I can sort of, my attitude now is I lean back and I'm like, oh, I'm humbled. I'm humbled.
So beautifully expressed. I mean, the dark night is such a profoundly humbling experience, isn't it? And think what you said about it going from I'm going to do all I can to make it my will to not my will. For me, there was both terror and relief in that.
Yes.
Because holding up, I mean, I get the image that comes to me is, Atlas holding up the world. That part of us is really been trying to do that. And I think what a relief to say, I don't know. I don't know.
I've been finding it to be a constant daily practice of trust. And this is something that's been coming up for me in the last sort of 9 months or so. How can I put it in words? Trust in, I don't know either. I don't know trust in what. Because, sometimes I hear I'm not religious, and I have a Jewish background, but being in North America, I've been exposed to, Christianity a lot, and I have dear friends who are believers. And one thing that I hear a lot is, trust in God. God will give you more than, better than what you want, what you ask. To me, that's what's the word I want to use here? That's negotiation. To me, I'm only trusting you because you're going to provide it better. But the way of trust that I'm starting to experiment and experience and work on is different than that. I just trust. And in life, tragedies happen. What we, with our human experience, call bad things happen. And with no explanation, sometimes not with a silver lining. It just does. And so if I'm saying not my will, it's something bigger than me, then I feel like I'm opening myself up to every single possibility, which includes not getting what I want in life.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought this up. To me, there's something about that trust. And I'm reminded of somebody that I quote in the book who said, you can't make a mood of this sort of trust. Like it can't be rehearsed. It can't be. And I think it's quite subtle in terms of trying to describe what it is we're trusting. Sometimes my sense is that it's a deep trust in the intelligence of the unfolding process. And it takes me back to what you said about how there was a shift in you from sort of mind to heart and body, making the heart and body the compass. Because my sense is that when we start to orientate to that compass, the trust starts to come naturally. And as you say, it's not at all some kind of insurance policy about against bad things from happening. not at all. And that's certainly been the case in my life. But it is trust in our ability to follow that compass and to know that we will, and what comes to me now is that we will live all of it. We will live the tragedy, the grief, the joy, anything that comes in, and we will be feeling it. And I think there's a depth and a richness to that which is difficult to convey.
Yeah, I really love what you said, because you said we're going to live it. You didn't say we're going to survive it. You said we're going to live it. We're going to feel it. That's that's it. That's it. Because and the insurance policy, yeah. There's no guarantee, or what does it even mean surviving it and you're going to be okay? I can't say that. I have no idea, but I'm going to live it. It is part of my this lifetime human experience. It's part of it. And the sort of the making the body the compass, and the way I experience it lately, it's so interesting, because when I make a plan and I say I'm going to do it this way, and life has a different path for me, what I notice really clearly is the pivoting happens for me through kicking and screaming and anxiety and not feeling okay, and because something is going on, and I wanted it to be this way. Something is happening. Now I'm understanding, having gone through it a few times. On the other side of it, I see, oh, this is actually when I am needing to pivot and get out of the way. And so it's not something that's bad is happening. It's just a reorientation is happening. And only when I come to terms with it, my whole body can relax and I can breathe.
Yes, that makes complete sense. I'd love to talk a bit more about the body as a compass, because I know
Mm.
that's both very much how we live and very much how we work. And it's subtle, isn't it? Because we're not saying that there's any sort of simple, there's no format to this, is there? It's not something that we can say, well, you do A, B, and C, and that means X, Y, Z. And it's not like that at all. But there's a sense of what I now call seeing/knowing/feeling, a sensing, which is all of those things that can, there's a thread to follow in that. And that taking time to sense into that, to listen, to see, to feel, opens us up in so many different ways, on so many different levels.
You know, Speaking of this, I think it's it's important to me to acknowledge that, sort of going back, and definitely through the Dark Knight experience. Around that time, I've started really more fundamentally working with the body in a different way. And I was fortunate enough that 15 years ago, when I first started receiving therapy, what I was receiving today is called somatic, you know, being in the being, seeing it in the body, where do you notice it, and all of those steps. Somatic wasn't even a word then. And I've done that many years. By then, I think it had been maybe 7, 8 years that I was sort of in that practice. And I was also practicing as a somatic therapist myself. But something deeper started to happen in that experience, where I think I started to recognize more and more the ways in which I disassociate, like everyone else. I don't use that word in a diagnostic way, because the present moment rarely was safe, rarely was peaceful. Maybe even my mom's body, when I was in her, from what I know, was not peaceful, safe her environment, right? And not because anything that she did wrong, it was just circumstantial. So being in the body, because somatic work requires us to be in the body. Well, being in the body, A, wasn't safe, wasn't taught us. We don't know what that is. So I think for me, through many practices and really deep therapy work and with, some medicine help and all of that, I think I first started to come back into my body. And for me personally, that process was choosing life. I know that that wonderful practitioner who held me to her chest, she would hold my feet a lot. Ground, here, come down, come here. Because for me, again, through books, through my mind, I loved checking out. I loved going. And I'm dreamy. I'm a Pisces. I go and dream and I live in different worlds. But that they were all because this didn't feel good to me.
I so relate to that. I mean, we talk about now everybody's talking about being in the body, as you say, aren't they? Everybody's using the word somatic. And for me, it's so important to acknowledge what you said, that for me, really another way of describing the whole of the dark night is becoming incarnated in a deeper way. Actually, to be in my body was all the things you described. And it was incredibly painful, terrifying, not safe. And to start to turn towards it, even though, I think it's what we have to do in the dark night, isn't it? Because we've got no choice. And over the years, as I was able to stay with myself more, the layers of not being here started to show up. So I remember a time a few years ago where for maybe a couple of weeks, every time I checked in with myself, I was in a layer of what I called avoidantness. For some reason, the word came up like that. And there were lots of different strands within this avoidantness, and memories and sensation and energy and seeing all of that. And then other times there's been the seeing of other forms of dissociation, basically. And I think when we start to touch into what it is to actually be here, it's one of the hardest things we can do. And I think often we think that we're here, but actually I can remember towards the end of the dark night, having the sense of being here really for the first time and feeling, my God, this is something else. Like, this is raw. I think I felt quite sick. Just the shock of being here. I can remember another time when what came in was, it feels like the anesthetic is wearing off. Oh my God, like feeling all of this stuff. And I think the level to which we're feeling in the dark night is so much deeper than we've ever experienced before.
Yeah. The shock of being here, that really made me think of, because we were sort of working with this theme of reincarnating, rebirthing, right? It's the birth shock. Whoa. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember really vividly, you know, I would be, and I think, again, one of the um, identifying factors of the dark night is starting to have that awareness, right? Starting to really feel it all, notice it all. Remember, I was on a bike. It was a beautiful day. I was listening to some music. I would be, for a second, joyful. The next thought is, what's missing? It's, how can I describe this? It's almost like I'm here biking in a park in Montreal. The music is really nice. The moment I feel the joy, a piece of me gets pulled out and put in a different reality, supposedly better. And this I realized was my way of disassociation over and over and over. This I'm not going to say even it's a belief. It was just a mechanism that thinks there is a different reality that's supposed to be, and this current one sucks because it can never match up to that one. And now I'm so grateful that that doesn't operate in my system anymore. I do still have wishes and desires and yearnings, yes, but I know this is my life. There isn't any other parallel reality that's supposed to be, and I'm constantly missing because that was very painful.
Thank you so much for articulating that. Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. That sense of a that I'm not living, a there that is so much better than here. So painful. And I think one of the things that has come to me repeatedly since the dark night, and it's not there all the time by any means, but I do experience it relatively frequently, is a sense of loving being here unconditionally. Loving being here, as in being alive. That feels so different to what you described. And I mean, I lived in that absolutely up until the dark night. I think there's something about the collapse of that structure, almost like when the collapse of something other than this happens, it's both devastating and also incredibly freeing.
Yeah. And you know, what's coming up for me is this what you said, loving being here. And I just remembered just a few weeks ago, I was at I think it was a kirtan in Bali. And there was this one split moment. Thank you for reminding me of that. I'm going to hold it because this split moment that I felt so grateful for the human experience, for all of it. And and I'm recognizing now that that kind of feeling to me comes through connection and connection with the divine, something bigger but that happens through human connection. Even this conversation right now with you, just talking about these things, I feel so grateful that we get to have these experiences. How rich! It's just incredible. And if I could just sit and imagine, I don't think my mind can imagine any of this. And it's so incredibly rich. And then, in our day to day life, I think I yearn to create more of these little pockets that I can touch these. And it can be maybe just simple lighting a candle and, putting an incense and just that ceremonial ritual. And through that also coming into the body, coming into the moment and making the moment be something that's livable.
Beautiful. You mentioned a while ago that for you, this is in no way complete. And I would say
Mm.
exactly the same thing. I think it would be good just to say a little bit about how that is for us or what that means, because my sense is that we're not saying that the Dark Night has just carried on. There's been a continuation, but it's not a continuation of how it was in its original form.
Yeah. I think one fundamental difference that I'm recognizing now is during the dark night, especially the beginning of it, especially the most intense parts of it, and most of it was intense. There was a sense of panic. There was, yeah, panic. I was gonna say fear, but I think it was more panic. And now there was almost this. the treasure and the gift of lived it, whatever it may be in any given context. And this is something that I recognize that I start sharing with my clients as well. This, I don't know if this comes with age necessarily or just life experience, but it's not all for vain. We take something from it. We've lived it, right? And that just at least creates a layer of okayness, a layer of no panic. Not that this happened before. I don't experience anything like dark night of the soul. Maybe just like moments in life that feels like, oh my God, what is happening? But then there's this wisdom. I think that's what wisdom is. Like what we call wisdom is this, that, oh, wait a second. And my system remembers as well. Yes, sometimes I need to soothe it with saying, hey, remember, we've done this before, something similar to this before, right? Yeah. And, like you were saying, I loved it, the avoidedness. And I do feel that. It's not like now that I've gone through an experience like that every day, I'm open, I'm a love bug walking around. I wish I was. Like, for instance, right now I'm staying at my mom's place and my brother is here as well. And so much is going on for me. So much noticing, so much activation and working through some and not being able to working through some. But I think again, what I'm really finding comfort in is I'm not panicking.
Beautiful. I mean, there's something about the capacity that we have, or a capacity that we've built, that it doesn't even feel like it's somehow I don't feel like I've made it so much as it's just around. And there's something deeply unconditional about that.
Mm. Mm.
And I think there's something so moving to me about moving from a paradigm of I can only be okay if I'm better, whatever better might mean, to a sense of okayness in whatever it is we're in. I know whatever the discomfort or comfort or nature of that I don't have to, the idea of, yes, the idea of improvement on this fell away in all of this. And that isn't to say, we're in an ongoing process of evolution in some way. It's absolutely not static at all.
Yeah, I'm being reminded of what you said earlier with that, the older woman taking care of us and us becoming that for ourselves. I have a picture of a grandmother. And I think so for a long time in my practice, it was being okay with not being okay, being okay with being not okay. And a client actually said that to me after a few years of working with me, and I was so touched. Oh, this was it, that I wanted to convey or for my clients to come to. And then through the process of Dark Night, I think it started then. One thing that came in for me is yes, and how do I also support myself and comfort myself in the not okay? Because otherwise it just becomes harming in a way. I would spend in my earlier years in personal development, cry, 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 cry. Okay. With no resource, with no comfort. So what am I doing? I'm just opening up the wound and bleeding and bleeding and bleeding. And then through being that sort of grandma and having grandmothers energetically to around me, grab your blanket, dear. Find a cozy corner in your home, dear.
Yes. I mean, constant catharsis with no comfort, no where to go. Absolutely. I think for me, it was eventually seeing a couple of things. One was that I had been really orientated towards suffering, that there was something in me that was I don't know, I get the word cleaving, cleaving to suffering in some way. And I think there was some deeper belief that that made me good. I think the other thing was not seeing what you just described about the possibility of comfort, the possibility of actually dropping the masochism of that in some way. And I started to see, like, oh, as you said, this constant bleeding. And of course, there's moments when release or crying or expression is absolutely what's happening in the moment. But I could feel there was a subtle something sort of pushing that almost. And we get to see it a lot, don't we, in therapeutic and spiritual culture, that, the idea of expressing and releasing and all of that. And often I find, both with myself and when I'm working with people, that a moment of doing something else comes in. That, as you said so beautifully, that yes and.
I love what you said with suffering. It's almost like suffering is or was the noble thing to do, right? If I'm suffering, I'm doing something. And what just came up for me now is just weaving everything together. If we're in the spiritual realm, if we're soldiers on that, warriors on that path, or we live in a capitalistic systems, right? So then it's like, so everything is to be pushed and be the superhero of the thing that we're doing. If his suffering is the thing that we're doing, so we gotta suffer the most and suffer to the deepest and the rock bottom and this and that. And let's imagine the rock bottom. If there was a beautiful soft blanket on that rock bottom when we fall, that's not taking away the fall, but at least making it right a little more bearable. And I know that during the dark night in that island, for me, and this was coming from Jeannie Zandy that I was working with, and her practice was around yin. She would talk about how most of the world are in unhealthy yang, this unhealthy masculine, energetical masculine, go, 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 do, should from the should. Whereas yin is let's comfort, but what I recognize then is that in the yin, as the body softens, the shoulds fall away, then the deepest wound comes up. So the yin is also not a walk in the park. And I think through that, then maybe I started looking back now, these pieces of, okay, then how can I take care of myself, going through the deepest pain while it's through also soothing. And for me, it was, the other woman who held me to her chest, she was a painter as well, and she had these rocks that she painted. At the end of a session, I purchased one from her, and it was just a big rock. I would hold that rock in my hand for months when I was in session with clients, when I was in my own therapy session, because that would ground me. That was my resource. And I carried that around for such a long time. So those little things, when we talk about, again, coming into the body, but if we don't have these little, whatever works for us, like you said earlier, it's not like, oh, if A, then Z is your answer. I wish I could give that. But it's through this experimentation, through awareness, what works for me, what doesn't work for me. And then that's how I almost armor myself, not armor in a closed up way, but armor in going through what is my task right now, which is my deepest wounding.
I'm smiling because I'm sitting next to my shelf with my rocks on. Absolutely finding those, and they're often way smaller than we imagine, aren't they? Those things that come in. It might be a rock, it might be a song, it might be a spending time in a place, it might be lying in a certain position.
Yeah.
It could be all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
And it feels to me like finding starting to feel into what that is for us is huge.
And they're simple, aren't they? They're not necessarily these, here's a somatic practice. Here is what you need to do to regulate your. They're so much more organic, almost, sort of bottom up. They come within. It's not like I tell you that this is the thing, and then we might receive suggestions, but it's again up to us to try and see what works.
I have one more question, if
Yeah.
that's okay.
I'm loving this conversation so much.
Me too. To anybody who's really in the intensity of it just now, what would you like to share?
I would say do your best to find others through books, through poetry. Mary Oliver, Fiona Robertson, go look them up so that this I'm not alone in this can be the resource that we've been talking about, right? Because it was for me, it can be such a scary experience. And I don't think there's a way up through our own will or things to do. So we might as well have companions. I think that's what kept me going.
Fiona, thank you so much for being a companion
Yeah.
today.
Thank
Really
you. Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
And thank you for today and also for writing the book, putting your experience out there. That's so brave, and it definitely helped at least one soul right here in front of you. So I'm grateful for you.
Thank you.